Hello and welcome to Shattered Lives. I'm sitting here in a park with Michael O'Toole, who has returned from the Lebanon. How are you doing, Mick?
I'm grand, Paul. Do you know, most journalists worry about being replaced by AI. I was replaced by nothing and it went very well. So, I feel great.
Well, I was trying to prove that the model does work without you, Mick, and unfortunately it does. So it was great working with you.
Yes, it's been a pleasure. We'll never forget you, Jimmy O'Toole.
No, look, the pod wouldn't be the pod without yourself, and it's good to have you back.
I thought it was great. I thought it was really, really good. And there you go. I'll just pack my bags.
We're sitting here in the Phoenix Park under some shade, and I suppose it's better to do these podcasts in person at times, isn't it? Just to kind of...
Yes, I like the energy of being able to smack you and stuff. So yeah, it was great.
Well, can you tell us about the Lebanon? Obviously, you were in Lebanon with the Taoiseach and visiting the 125th Infantry. So tell us a bit about that.
Yes, so they're the Irish component of UNIFIL, which is a 10,000 strong United Nations force on what's called the Blue Line, which is the effective border between Israel and Lebanon. Now, there's been an awful lot of what the army would call kinetic activity, which I would call shooting and bombs and stuff. They're really the last 15 months. There has been a ceasefire since the end of November. So 339 members of the Defence Forces are in the 125th Infantry Battalion, and they're over there. So the Taoiseach, Simon Harris, who's, as well as being Taoiseach, he's Minister for Foreign Affairs and for Defence. So he went over to visit them, and some press, including myself, went over. It was a very, very frenetic trip. We were in the camp, it's called Camp Shamrock. We were there for about 5 hours. Very, very busy. We were actually based in Beirut, which is 3 hours north of the camp. So we had to get into all that full body armour you see, into a Moag armoured car, do a 3-hour journey, interview as many of the people as we could, type away to bejesus, then get back into the Moag and get sent up again. So it was a really, really hectic day, but it's always very enjoyable.
Now, I saw a photo of you and some of the other hacks sitting in the back of one of those tanks, and you looked a little worse for wear. What was that like? Just not being able to go to the toilet and whatnot.
Yeah, so the body armour first start, right, it's 2 stone. So you're carrying that and you have to walk around with it, and it's got these, it's called level 4, that protects you from a Kalashnikov round. So it's really, really good protection. So that it's grand. You wear it for about 10 minutes. After that, it starts to get very, very boring very, very quickly. And yeah, look, it was a 3-hour journey. We were warned. The Moags are great, but they don't have toilet facilities. So it's literally, when we got our breakfast, and that's my 8th trip to the Leb. So I knew from last time that there could be a problem. So I just had a very, very small espresso before I went, because the worst thing you can do is sit in the Moag waiting to go to the toilet for 3 hours before you get to the camp. So thankfully there were no accidents, but it was hairy, and I'll have to say it was look, it's €1 million, the armoured car. And it's comfortable, but it was hot and it was sweaty and it was very dark, and I had to say, it was actually the most tense trip we've had. The Army Ranger Wing were there protecting the Taoiseach, and maybe there were 20 of them. There were an awful lot of them. There were lots of heavy armour protecting the Taoiseach. I think they were clearly very worried about his security. So they're always very alert, but you could see that they were taking extra precautions for this trip.
Because there had been incidents in the vicinity prior to.
Yeah, I mean, I monitor this, and there were drone strikes by the Israelis about 4 kilometres from the camp. Now, they explained to us, 4 kilometres, it's very, very close for a bomb. You really feel it. So, yeah, look, they were taking no precautions, to put it that way.
Shall we talk about Conor McGregor?
Let's talk about Conor McGregor.
Never seems to be a week that goes by that he's not in the news these days, but McGregor is in the news now because he's running for president. But what interests us as crime journalists is, I suppose, the revelation last week that the DPP has decided not to prosecute him in relation to the Dublin riots. So people may remember in November, obviously, of 2023, the Dublin riots. There were rather incendiary tweets, I would say, from McGregor at the time on X, formerly Twitter, where he said things to the effect of Ireland is at war, and I think he even tweeted out some footage from the actual riots and said, you reap what you sow. So there was a lot of backlash to that, and we broke the story, I don't know if you remember, at the time, that Gardaí were investigating those tweets and looking at them basically under hate speech laws, archaic hate speech laws, and there had been discussion going on at the time about new hate speech laws, but they were looking at that, investigating his tweets. But the revelation last week is the DPP have decided not to prosecute McGregor. So to explain that, the National Bureau of Criminal Investigation, Gardaí, recommended charges in relation to McGregor, sent it on to the DPP, and they've come back saying no charge. And he's obviously naturally celebrating that.
Did he tweet? I think the DPP wrote him a letter saying they've directed no charges.
Yeah,
the guards wrote him a letter.
In fairness to McGregor, he actually revealed first that the DPP had directed no charge, and he put it out there on Twitter. We can't just take McGregor's word for it, so we obviously had to go and check with our sources. And in fact, actually, Gardaí came back in the end and formally, I suppose, on the back of his own announcement, said that the DPP had recommended no charges. I think, without speaking out of turn too much and trying not to give my opinion too much, I don't know whether there would have been an appetite even in An Garda Síochána. They have to investigate these things, but I don't know whether there would have been an appetite to take this to court anyway.
Let me ask you this. Were you surprised that he wasn't charged?
No, not
me
at all.
neither. It's
No.
a very... And look, people from various persuasions will have views on this, but I think there has to be a very high bar for this. And there should be a very high bar for this, because you could say something that somebody might dislike and might say this is hate speech and might make an allegation or a complaint to Gardaí.
Yeah.
So there really does have to be a very high barrier. And I think, to be fair to Mr McGregor, he did tweet stuff, but he also did put out tweets saying effectively everybody can the head, don't be doing anything. So there is a very high bar, and I would contend there has to be, because a lot of us would be in trouble if the bar was lowered.
I don't know whether the DPP takes this into consideration, but also the notoriety of who he is, and bringing someone like that to court. Does that come into their consideration at all, or are they just simply looking at the statute and saying, look, this doesn't really fall into hate speech as it's defined?
Well, it's a human decision. So even, we've spoken about this before in relation to other stuff, that Gardaí... Do you remember that story we did about basically that the probe into the Regency is over, effectively over until other things comes along? Now, I'm not making any parallels about that. I'm just saying the DPP looks at it sort of holistically, and it's not just the narrow confines of statute. It's all about public confidence and that sort of thing, So... And it's a human decision at the end of the day. So it is a multifactorial decision, I'll put it that way. But can you imagine if he had gone on trial? Jesus, the publicity and trying to get into that case would have been very difficult.
I mean, I'm personally all for free speech, and I think that there has to be a line drawn in terms of, what is considered incitement to hatred, and that's obviously an ongoing discussion. I don't know personally whether his tweets went quite that far. Having said that, he obviously has a massive platform, and what he said that day, albeit he calmed the storm after the fact, but he did put out some things that were incendiary at the time, and at the absolute minimum where he should have known better.
Yeah, they were ill thought out.
Yeah.
Be kind.
Yeah. To be kind to Mr McGregor. Obviously he's in the news now as well because he's running for president, and I see that Sky News have done a survey of all of the Oireachtas members, so 134 of them responded, which is an overwhelming majority. All of them said that they would not back McGregor's bid for the presidency. So to explain, I think he needs the support of 20 Oireachtas members in order to be able to run for president in this country. So you might see a lot of people on X and in America in particular saying that McGregor is being blocked, or that there's some sort of campaign against him. That's the way our democracy works. You have to have the backing of Oireachtas members or of 4 county councils. We don't know how councils are going to vote, but I think that's an even tougher ask, to be honest.
I think I did see another story that somebody, was it the Irish Times, contacted Oireachta councillors, and they all come back. I think only one councillor said, well, I have to see how I feel, or I have to see what he says. And it's not a secret vote. In other words, they have to, I think it's a show of hands or something.
Declare.
Right? So, look, I'll put it this way, I think he faces a seriously uphill battle. Now, look, if you look what he says on X, he seems very confident that he's going to get that. I wouldn't share that level of confidence, but who knows what will happen. Maybe councillors might come under pressure to say, well, look, this is his democratic right. Let the people decide. Some councillors might do that, but I don't know if that would be enough to get 4 councils. Yeah. You know what I mean? There could be 3 or 4 in this council, 2 or 3 in that council. I don't know if he would have the mass enough to get 4 councils, and I doubt very much that he's going to get 20 members of the Oireachtas.
I highly doubt it, and particularly while that decision by the jury remains that he was found liable for the rape of Nikita Hand. Obviously, it's now come out that he is appealing that on new evidence. He says we have to see what that new evidence is, and it'll be some time before that's heard before the Court of Appeal.
So I think this happened while I was away, and I think the court heard there is new evidence, but the court wasn't told what it is.
We don't know what it is, so I mean, that'll come out in the wash, I suppose, and those judges will have to determine whether that evidence is enough of a grounds for appeal. At the moment, he's liable for that rape, and he's had to pay Nikita Hand 200,000 so far of the damages. I think he's possibly relying, I don't want to read his mind, but he's possibly relying on that happening sooner rather than later, before the election in November. If he manages to overturn that, maybe he thinks then he'd get Oireachtas support. But I just can't see, on the principle of just politically, how 20 members of the Oireachtas would support somebody who's been found liable for rape. He's also been incredibly outspoken. I mean, he hasn't stopped, really. I just think that flies in stark contrast to Nikita Hand, who in fairness has been dignified and silent throughout all of this, as is her right, and she may want to speak out someday. But I think that speaks volumes as well. You know, in the end of the day, there was a lot of evidence heard in that case, separate to even Nikita's own testimony, you know, in relation to her injuries, and I think it'll be very difficult to overturn that decision. Let me ask something, Paul. If you remember after the verdict, McGregor became very, very quiet for I thought he'd be quiet for months, but he sort of, he came out fighting within a very short period of time, and I was quite shocked by that. I thought he would have had his tail between his legs and he would have gone quiet. It's as if he went quiet for a couple of days and then he just came back out. I was surprised by that. I mean, I think it's in keeping with his personality. You know, he just seems to be very spur of the moment, puts things out, as he thinks them. He has a PR team which I've dealt with extensively, and they are very professional. I've gotten some statements from them in the past, but in the interim, between trying to get a comment from them, he's often just put something out on social media. I see now he's trying to say nobody should believe the mainstream media, as he calls it, and he's having a go at the likes of us. Just look at the facts, okay? The Oireachtas don't support him. The majority of the Oireachtas do not support him for a reason. He's been found liable for rape. All of the facts are out there. You can make your mind up after that. And the jury, I always say this, and judges always say this, the only groups who attend every part of a trial are the judge and the jury. Barristers can come and go, solicitors, witnesses, journalists, but it's the judge and the jury who hear all the evidence, and that jury made a finding against them. They did, and that finding stands, and I don't see that changing in the interim anyway, between now and the presidential election. And I don't expect you to know this, Paul, but just, you know the way when we've spoken about this, when there's an appeal in a criminal case, it's on a point of law. Is that the same in a judicial thing? Or a civilian? It is the same, yes, it is the same, on a point of law. Now, new evidence is one of those, that if he's saying that there's certain evidence that hasn't been admitted in the trial, that has to be considered. We don't know what that is. I mean, he relied heavily upon the CCTV footage and tried to say that the footage itself was contradictory to Nikita's story. Another thing that he actually admitted into evidence was a secretly recorded tape of Nikita's partner talking to her, which I actually think stood more in her favour because it backed up an awful lot of her story, because that was recorded in the first 24 hours of the allegation, and an awful lot of what she said to her boyfriend was exactly consistent with the story that she's told all along. So I think that kind of blew up in his face a little bit. So I don't know what he's got now that in some way is different to what we've heard in that civil case. We'll see what that is. We talk about the family because you were away for this, and obviously it's one of the things we talked about on the podcast. The update being that the 6 individuals who were arrested last week in relation to the investigation into the organisation we're calling the family have been released. So talk to me about the significance of this, because these people really are at the top tier of this gang. Yeah, so Seamus Boland, Detective Chief Superintendent Seamus Boland, who's the head of the Garda National Drugs and Organised Crime Bureau, effectively late last year said that the family are now the biggest drugs gang in Ireland. We know that the Kinahan cartel is massive, but that's an international cartel. It really has moved away from day-to-day operations in Ireland. And the family have, to a large extent, taken that over. I mean, we did a story, I think it was last year, that they were sending out €8 million every month from Ireland abroad to be laundered. And we know that there have been instances where the Gardaí have seized several million euro of their money, but that's how much they're sending out, and that shows you how significant their operation is. So there has been a major operation against the family, I think really maybe for 3 or 4 years, but it just goes to show you it's almost like a large ship turning. It takes a while for the Garda operation to kick in and then to show results, and I think it has shown results. And I think the way they talk about the Kinahan cartel has been significantly degraded. I think it's fair to say that the family has been seriously degraded now.
You're right, Paul. Those 6 men who were arrested, they were released without charge. Were you surprised by that?
No, and I mean, it was indicated to us early on that was probably going to be the outcome of this investigation, unless these people started squealing and started confessing their involvement. They're under investigation for effectively running a criminal organisation, and this is a new charge that we've talked about. You know, a lot of people have been arrested and charged over this running a criminal organisation charge. That requires an awful lot of investigating. It takes time because Gardaí have to prove in court ultimately the existence of this criminal organisation and then prove that these individuals are the people heading it. So we knew it wasn't going to be overnight. Having said that, they'll gather all of their evidence now and they'll send a file to the DPP.
So the way it works, there are various phases in the, I was going to say the investigation, but in the process. So there's the investigation process, then there's the arrest process where all that evidence is put to them, because you have to say, I put it to you that you run this criminal organisation. Yeah. So that's what was last week. Now, usually the way it works, as you're right, Paul, unless they make what the guards call admissions or we call confess, the file has to go to the DPP. So we're probably at that stage where the file is largely prepared now. So the next stage will be for the investigations file to be sent to the DPP. Now, with a big file like this, it's very complex. It could be 6 months to a year that the DPP has to examine this, because it's very technical, very complex, and there's lots of minutiae. So, but I wouldn't be surprised if within the year some of these people were charged, because from what we understand, they have significant evidence against them, including the encrypted funds from Ghost. Yeah.
Well, this all started with the breaking of that Ghost network, which started from an Australian kid's bunker, and it was an encrypted network being used by criminal gangs all over the world. International cooperation has led to the breakdown of that, and ultimately the sharing of intelligence that led Gardaí to the door of the family in September of last year. There were multiple raids, massive seizures of drugs in the interim, but also, more significantly so, Gardaí have, with the cooperation of Spanish police, broken down the family's day-to-day operations, shipping these drugs into Ireland, hidden in compartments, very sophisticated compartments in vehicles, being brought across Europe here to Ireland. So they've arrested the people that they suspect were actually shipping these drugs. So while they've released the leaders of this gang, their day-to-day operation has been effectively stifled, and so the gang has been largely dismantled in their day-to-day operations, we'd say.
And one of the most important things for any gang is to have that network. You can't just magic something out of your backside about developing a smuggling route. So smuggling routes and people who will do that, they're very precious. So it looks as if that route for the family has gone. So I noticed Mooney in the Sunday Times had a piece about the price of cocaine wholesale increasing, because it's getting harder to source cocaine, because there have been a significant amount of seizures in the last 3 or 4 years. You know that I chronicle them, and it's every sort of couple of days. I noticed today's Wednesday, there was a €2.5 million, that was cannabis up in Donegal this morning. It's every week, it seems, there are multi-million euro seizures of drugs. So I've no doubt that the Garda intelligence and the Garda cooperation with all these other police forces and law enforcement has seriously increased. Because they are getting an awful lot of seizures, and that has to be affected on the street. And
remember the words of Shamie Boland. He did say that this gang, which we're referring to as the family, is Ireland's main supplier of cocaine and heroin. So that is significant enough, But cocaine is rampant even still, They are, as I said in the podcast last week, only one of a multitude of gangs that are trying to fill that void left by the Kinahan cartel. But the breakdown of this gang is hugely significant, and we shouldn't water down the significance of this. They may be out and about, they may be able to even leave the country, but Gardaí are watching them now, and that file is going to the DPP.
Yeah, but the other thing, Paul, I've done this game long enough that I remember there have been 4 or 5 iterations of major gangs in Ireland, and when they've gone, someone has always come in to fill the vacuum. So you can bet your bottom dollar there is another group of criminals who are sitting there watching the family's travails, and they'll go, I'll have a bit of that cake, because there's so much money to be made. I mean, if they're sending €8 million out a month to be laundered, how much are they actually making a month? Probably significantly more than that. So it's a huge, you're right, cocaine is everywhere, cannabis is still Ireland's #1 drug. Cannabis and cocaine, they're just absolutely everywhere, and there's massive money to be made.
Huge money. So we'll keep an eye on that case. Another case we want to talk about, again, we were speaking about it on the podcast last week, but unfortunately there are still no major developments in the search for Michael Gaine. He's a 56-year-old farmer from Kenmare in Killarney. He disappeared from his land there and hasn't been seen since. Since then, there's been 250 volunteers. People have been searching every single day. The Coast Guard, the Civil Defence have got involved, local Gardaí, the water unit, helicopters, drones. No sign of this man. So the latest development now is that the Army have gotten involved.
So the Army have special skills, and even when I go to the Glen of Amal, when they do their exercises, it's a mountainous rural area, and the Army are used to wading through this sort of stuff. And I think the area they're searching, it's perfect for the Army because they're used to going through heavy big fields and that sort of stuff, and they're specialist searches. They're coming from Limerick and Kilkenny, I believe, so I think there's about 50 of them. So I noticed that the guards thanked members of the public and they say, look, thanks for your efforts, but we don't need you because we've got these specialist search things.
Yes.
But look,
I think stopped people going out and searching though on their own whim.
But I think you're right, Paul. I don't think the guards know what has happened to this man. But I without being harsh, I think it's very unlikely that this is going to come to a happy ending, and put it that way.
No, I mean, at this stage there has been a kind of a widespread acceptance that at this point they are looking for a body. There's been no sign of this man. It's completely out of character for him to disappear. The only thing that's really quite strange about this is that he seems to have left his vehicle unattended with his wallet and his phone inside. He's seen on CCTV on the morning of the Thursday he's believed to have gone missing, buying phone credit. Then he leaves the phone in the car. Now I've spoken to those close to him and said he just wouldn't do that. So there is a fear that something happened in the yard and that maybe he's been taken to another location. There are obviously other possibilities, and I'm not saying that foul play is the only possibility here, but Gardaí are more and more looking at that possibility. They don't know what's happened to this man. It's baffled his family and all of those who know him. But I'm just curious what you think. You're around a little bit longer than me, no offence. But I've never seen a search for somebody on this scale, have you?
Yes, I have. I was only thinking about this the other day. I remember there was a lady who disappeared around Finglas. And if you remember, you probably won't remember, but the lady's dog stayed with her. And it was quite a long time, like weeks before I think the body was, the lady's remains were found. So searches like this do happen. Very, very rare that it would take this long and it would take this amount of personnel. All the emergency services, from what you were saying, the helicopter, and obviously one of the things the helicopter have is it has heat-seeking cameras, so it can spot any warmth from bodies. So that was significant that nothing was found. So look, it is a big operation. The one thing is the guards, they do know what they're doing. It's not their first rodeo. They do a lot of searches like this, but I think it's fair to say, regretfully, hope is fading every minute, never mind every day.
I think, and they haven't, no stone has been left unturned. I mean, they have searched lakes, they've searched rivers, reservoirs, they've searched mountainous terrain. They are now even appealing for motorists who may have seen activity on the nearby roads, and that to me indicates that maybe there was a fear that he'd gone elsewhere. Having said that, a lot of the searches and the focus still remain around the land, and even the vehicle was taken away for forensic testing. So they're really scratching their heads on this one. It's just so strange. And
it could be quite some time before the forensics come back from the car to say if there's blood or anything like that. But look, it is an ongoing investigation. I know the guards and other agencies are working very hard for it, but I'm sorry to say I don't really expect good news on this.
We'll keep an eye on that case. Obviously, as of the recording of this podcast, Mr. Gaine remains missing. I just want to briefly mention, I had a story on the weekend about overcrowding in the prisons. Overcrowding is nothing new in our prisons, but I'm told we're about to reach a number of an all-time high. Now, it's an all-time high almost every day, but 5,500 prisoners is a figure I don't think anyone quite expected. You've got, for example, in Clover Hill, 4 prisoners sleeping in a cell. That's 2 on the floor. I believe. So, I mean, it's very crowded, cramped conditions, I'm told. As a result of that, so there are figures only released in the last couple of days that reveal that assaults on prisoners on prisoner assaults are up by 31% on the previous year. That's as a result largely of the overcrowding crisis. And the reason I did this story is because I was told that a number of TDs went to visit Mountjoy Prison last week and they were shocked at the conditions. And they saw, broken lights, broken toilets. And I'm told, for example, with the toilets, right, the prison service cannot get plumbers in. They can't get those toilets fixed because in order to do that, they'd have to move prisoners and there's nowhere to move them to. So you've got people, unable to go to the toilet or dealing with broken toilets, broken lights, cracked paint, broken down prisons that are not fit for purpose. And I'm told the big fear now is coming into the warmer months. That's going to increase tensions. And even in cells like solitary confinement, 23 hours a day, that's a high pressure environment, and there are real fears and concerns over that.
I remember, I think I said this before, I remember a former Republican talking to me about how small things become big things in prison because it's more so intense and it's so concentrated, I suppose. So you can imagine if there are 4 of you, 2 of you sleeping on mattresses on the floor, and there might be a small row that really magnifies itself in prison. And I always think this, people always give out about, prisoners having TVs and PlayStations. Let them have it. There's nothing worse than your liberty being taken away. And and I know they've done horrible things, but they're humans at the end of the day.
Yeah.
And I just think, it's not good for the prisoners, and it's not good for the prison staff who have to deal with this. So it's obviously a major issue. I can remember it used to be about 3,500 people in prison, and that's a rate that's almost 2,000 of a leap. That's a big problem.
And you imagine getting assaulted in prison. Again, you might not have sympathy for prisoners, but to be assaulted in prison must be terrifying. I mean, you've literally got nowhere to go. You can't escape from it, so that is a terrifying prospect.
But even if you have a row with somebody, you can't go and take a walk and cool your jets because you're locked up in your cell, and it's a very, very small cell. It's terrible.
Yeah, no, look, the government are trying to build a new prison, and now they're floating Thornton Hall all over again. People may remember that land. But there are short-term solutions that are being suggested. I know Jim O'Callaghan is looking at this, the Minister for Justice. There's been suggested by the opposition as well, possibility of letting prisoners who are in there on maybe lesser offences or who are in there awaiting trial to be released effectively wearing a electronic tag, so under house arrest. Now, they've done something like that in the UK. Largely successful sort of scheme. I think it just takes so long to get anything done in this country. Why are we talking about a project, trying this out? Why don't they just do it?
But Paul,
that's the way it is.
If they did that here, they'd have to have a working group, then they'd have to have a pilot scheme.
Yeah, no, that's the way it'll be.
I'll be retired by the time it's working, and I'm not that old.
Yeah, now I think it's been done before, but they're talking on a much larger scale. I mean, there is a significant portion of people that are in prison for theft offences, minor theft offences, that they could let out and have them be tagged, be monitored. That could relieve, I think, the system of up to 1,000 prisoners, I was told. So you've got 5,500 in there now. You can take 1,000 out tomorrow.
Wow.
But look, at the moment, nothing's been done.
Would any minister do that? Because it would play out terribly in the public. Yeah, unless they managed it.
It's a bad look. It's a bad look, and especially if you want to be a party of law and order, to be releasing people from prison is not a good look. And I think Keir Starmer in the UK has got a bit of backlash for that too.
And then you can imagine if, say, 1,000 are they released, it only takes one of them to go and beat up a pensioner or something, and then it's all over the front pages. Yeah.
Well, look, it's a crisis, I'm told, and really there's a lot of frustration within the prison service because everybody in there wants the best for the service, but there is growing frustration that they've been screaming about this for a decade now, and it's just got worse and worse. I just want to again also briefly mention, it's not really a crime, but we often have to cover road deaths, which are obviously horrendous and tragic no matter what the circumstances, but one that really stood out there, probably just because of the time of the year, was a terrible crash there in Mallow, where a young woman, 41 years of age, Susan O'Sullivan, lost her life, as did a 63-year-old lady, Mary Coughlin. A head-on collision where both cars crashed on Mother's Day. Now, Miss O'Sullivan, her 2 children were in the back of the car with her, 8 and 5 years of age, and they have thankfully survived this tragedy. And now I think the young girl is in a serious enough condition, but she has non-life-threatening injuries. She did have to get some surgery, but they've lost their mother, and it's very hard to. I mean, I got an awful lot of tributes, a lot of people paying tribute to Susan O'Sullivan there the other day. Local parish priest was telling me how he visited the house and spoke of the devastation, and just trying to come to terms with just suddenly losing somebody like that. I can't imagine it.
The ones, every death we do is a tragedy, every murder, but the incidents and the deaths that really, really get to me are 2 children, either being killed or dying in accidents, and any road crash. I think because the road crash, because you are in the wrong place at the wrong time, and even if you're 5 seconds earlier or 5 seconds later, you may have avoided it. And they just from a reporting perspective, they really get to me because they're so random.
For me, I mean, they're the most difficult thing to cover in the job, I think, because they're just horrendously tragic, and there are innocent people just caught up in I mean, I'm sure that when people go out that morning or that day, they don't, they're not expecting that. It's not like crime. No. It's just tragic all round. So it's a very, very hard thing to cover, but we do try to get the person's name and their photograph and have them be remembered beyond the statistic, you know.
And the reason we do that is because they count.
Yeah.
Because they are more than just 3 paragraphs in a paper. They're obviously, it's a massive trauma for the whole family, but that every person who dies in a car crash is loved and is well known in their community and is well respected, and they deserve more than a few paragraphs in a paper.
Absolutely. And just on the back of that, I'll mention over the course of the same weekend there was also a fatal crash in Kilkenny. A lady by the name of Yelena Kuzik, she was struck by a car in Callan, she died. And in Waterford, Vieira Augusta Cava, she was in her 60s and she died in a crash in Monameen. So, you know, that's 4 women who lost their lives over the course of one weekend.
Terribly sad.
Hard to get your head around it.
It's shocking. It's shocking. So random.
Last thing you want to mention is this is a really interesting story about scammers, Irish scammers.
So one of the things I do is I look out for European stories, and there's always, you do a search for in all these French and Italian and Spanish, and what I've noticed in the last 18 months, there's been a preponderance of what they're calling the Irish scam. And it's these guys, now, they're sort of Anglo-Saxon, they can be Irish or English, and they're both, but it's called the Irish scam, and they're marauding all around Europe, they're travelling all around Europe. I did a story on Wednesday, it should be up online later on, about these 2 Irish fellas were done in Limoges in central France. They scammed 22 people out of up to €2,000 each. And essentially what they did was they pretended their car had been broken into. They went up to them and said, look, up to French people speaking in English and saying, look, I've no money, I've no cash. Can I Revolut you or send you money on my app? And maybe you could withdraw the money for me. And these good Samaritans went to help these people whose car windows were smashed and there was a kid in the car. And they took out $2,000 and then they took the money and then did a runner. Jeez. So they were caught, and there were 22 cases. Now, one fella wasn't arrested, but he was charged. The other fella, their brothers, the other fella was arrested and charged, but he was let out in bail of €30,000, did a runner. But they were both convicted in their absence in Limoges late last week, and they got 2 years in prison. So there's now an arrest warrant out for them. But I keep an eye on this. Every week there is a story in either the Italian, French or Spanish, even German media, about the Irish scammers. So it's one of our worst exports, I suppose, that it's, you know, they're doing false, really bad quality tarmac, they're scamming people, and they are making an absolute fortune, and they're going all around Europe. And they're known in Europe as the Irish scammers. They're making so much money that they're going around Europe and they're making an absolute fortune.
And not just, I mean, I remember reading about a case in Australia, so it's a worldwide
it's absolutely
phenomenon.
Everywhere, and it's raking them in an awful lot of money.
Mental.
Anyway,
I think we should leave it there. So yeah, we're going to get out of this lovely park now, but it's much better than the office, isn't it?
Paul wanted to do this in Phoenix Park because he wants to go and talk to all his touts in the Garda depot, don't you?
Yeah, I've got to be over there now for tea and biscuits. Listen, thanks for listening to us. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.